The classroom hung silently above the swirling gases of the toxic planet below. Through the wide, transparent walls, the students could see flashes of lightning and clouds of greenish gas that curled like snakes over the jagged mountains. The planet's surface was not meant for life, at least not for most of the species in this room. Yet here they were, part of a training program that promised to prepare the galaxy's young minds for survival in the deadliest places known. Alien students of every imaginable shape and size fidgeted nervously. Some had long, thin limbs that shook uncontrollably as they adjusted complicated devices strapped to their wrists. Others had thick scales that rattled softly as they moved, and a few had multiple eyes that blinked in a rhythm that suggested fear and excitement at the same time. They whispered to each other, their voices a mix of clicks, hums, and low gurgling sounds. None of them had faced a death world before, and the word alone made their hearts pound. At the front of the classroom, a tall figure with purple skin and sharp, angular features moved slowly across the room. The instructor's eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the planet's storms outside. His voice was deep, resonant, and commanding as he addressed the room. "Today's task," he said, "is simple in words but deadly in practice. You will survive the Death World simulation. You will face hazards that are not forgiving. You will retrieve the crystal at the center. Any mistake may be fatal. Are you ready?" The room went quiet except for the low murmurs of anxious students. Most of them were already thinking of the devices, weapons, and shields they had packed. They had been preparing for months, if not years, for exercises like this. But even with all their gear, they could feel the tension building in their chests. In the corner, sitting calmly on a bench that seemed far too small for her frame, was a human girl named Anna. Her skin was pale, and her brown hair fell loosely around her shoulders. She had come from a harsh death world herself, a planet where the air was thin, the storms frequent, and the wildlife deadly. She had learned to survive not with gadgets or complex plans, but with observation, instinct, and careful judgment. Anna unpacked her gear slowly, deliberately. From her small backpack, she pulled out a simple blade, a water container, and a few basic survival tools. Nothing complex, no high-tech shields or scanners. Just what she needed to rely on herself. She arranged her items neatly on the bench and checked them once, twice, then set her hands on her knees and waited. The alien students noticed her immediately. Some stopped adjusting their gear, whispering to one another in shock. One of the multi-eyed students tilted its head, clicking softly. "How can a human survive here?" it asked in disbelief, its voice trembling. Another whispered, "She has nothing. Nothing at all. How is this possible?" Anna did not answer. She did not look up. Her calmness was almost unnerving in the room full of panicked aliens. She had seen worse. On her home planet, the storms could rip buildings apart, the ground itself could turn against you, and predators could track your scent for miles. The Death World simulation they were about to enter was nothing compared to that. For her, this was practice. The instructor stepped closer to the edge of the classroom, looking out at the deadly planet below. He let his eyes linger for a moment on the swirling green storms, the jagged mountains, and the glowing cracks in the ground. "The simulation will begin shortly," he said. "Remember, those who panic will not last. Those who plan too much without thinking will not last. Only those who adapt will survive." Anna listened carefully, though she did not need the warning. Adaptation was what kept her alive every day. She had learned to read danger in the wind, to understand the subtle movements of animals, to notice changes in the ground that meant death or safety. It was all instinct now, second nature. The other students began to make last-minute adjustments. One alien pulled out a complex, spinning device that looked like a small globe, pressing buttons and murmuring calculations. Another activated a shield that hummed and sparkled, covering them in a soft glow. Yet Anna did nothing. She simply tightened the strap on her small pack and shifted slightly, stretching her legs. Her eyes scanned the classroom, taking in the nervous faces, the trembling hands, the shaky devices. A few students stared openly at her now. They were fascinated, though afraid. One muttered, "She doesn't even look worried." Another whispered, "She's a human, from a death world," they said. I didn't believe it, but now, their voices trailed off, unsure of what to say. The presence of Anna made the rest of them question everything they had been taught about survival and preparation. The instructor's gaze returned to the students. "I see some of you are ready," he said, eyes landing briefly on Anna. "And some are still learning. Do not underestimate the environment. It does not care for your species, your technology, or your cleverness. Respect it or it will kill you." Anna's lips curved into the faintest smile. Respect was something she always carried with her. On her home planet, disrespecting the world meant certain death. Here, in the classroom, it was no different. The aliens may have relied on technology, calculations, and complicated tools, but Anna relied on herself. That was her advantage. The room grew quieter as the countdown began. Lights dimmed slightly and a soft hum filled the air. The simulation interface activated, showing the dangers she and the others would face: jagged terrain, aggressive creatures, and chemical hazards. The alien students gasped. Some stepped back instinctively. Their devices beeped frantically, scanning the simulated environment, calculating risks, and generating warnings. Anna did not move. She watched the simulated world carefully, noting every detail, every shadow, every pattern in the winds and clouds. She was learning, but it was instinctive. Her hands rested lightly on her knees, ready to move if necessary. To the aliens, her stillness looked like calm, but it was more than that. It was readiness. A few students whispered among themselves, trying to figure out how she could be so composed. "Does she not fear the simulation?" one asked. Another said, "Maybe humans are just different. From birth, they survive things we can't imagine." The more they whispered, the more anxious they became. Finally, the instructor raised a hand, signaling the start. "Begin." The hum in the room shifted as the simulation interface opened a portal at the center of the classroom. The swirling storms of the death world appeared in miniature before them, complete with harsh winds, jagged rocks, and the smell of simulated sulfur. Alien students froze, some overwhelmed, some excited. Their devices beeped rapidly, and a few already started activating shields and weapons. Anna stood slowly. Her movements were smooth, deliberate, and calm. She stepped forward, her eyes scanning the path before her. She had done this before in real environments far deadlier than any simulation. For her, it was just another step, another challenge. The humans of her home planet had been raised on survival in extremes. Fear was a tool, not a master. The alien students continued to whisper behind her. Some were nervous, some curious, but all watched. The moment Anna stepped forward, the classroom shifted into the simulation. The lights dimmed and the air grew thick and heavy with a greenish haze that smelled faintly of sulfur and wet earth. The walls of the room flickered and melted into a landscape that looked terrifyingly real. Jagged rocks jutted from the ground, the soil steamed as if it were boiling, and acid rain fell in hissing sheets that sizzled as it touched the rocks. From above, massive insects crawled out of crevices in the simulated ground. Their legs clicked and scraped as they moved, each one twice the size of an adult human. Their segmented bodies glinted in the harsh green light, and their mandibles snapped open and closed with a sound that made the hair on the alien students' necks stand on end. The plants surrounding the area weren't any less frightening. Spiky vines whipped back and forth as though they had a mind of their own, and the thorns were coated with a toxin that could burn through the toughest exoskeleton in minutes. The alien students panicked immediately. Their limbs flailed as they scrambled to activate devices and shields, some of which were complicated beyond reason. Small screens on their wrists flashed red and beeped constantly. One student tried to launch a protective drone, but it flew in the wrong direction and crashed into a thorny bush, setting off a tiny explosion that sent acid droplets spraying across the simulated field. Another activated a force field, but it flickered weakly and collapsed when a gust of wind from the simulation hit it. Anna crouched low to the ground, letting her eyes scan every detail. She could see the slight shimmer of acid pooling between the jagged rocks, the subtle movement of the insects waiting to strike, and the sharp tips of the spiky plants that could cut through even the strongest armor. She moved slowly, deliberately, placing her feet only where the ground looked safe. Every step was measured, careful, precise. She didn't panic. She had learned to read danger in a single glance. A multi-eyed alien behind her let out a high-pitched squeak of panic. "She's moving too slowly," it shouted, its voice cracking. "The simulation is deadly. She'll be crushed, bitten, or burned." Another alien, green-skinned with a long neck, activated a spinning shield device that created a rotating bubble of light around itself. "I'm safe. I am safe," it yelled, only for the shield to flicker and sputter as one of the acid droplets landed on it. Sparks flew and the shield dissolved. The alien shrieked and scrambled backward, falling into a shallow pit filled with simulated lava. Its panic grew louder, and it began shrieking instructions at another student, who was also panicking. Meanwhile, Anna moved forward as if she were walking through a quiet garden. She didn't jump or dash. She didn't call for help or activate any devices. She simply observed, calculated, and acted. A thorned vine suddenly lashed out near her shoulder, but she leaned back just enough, letting it snap harmlessly into the dirt behind her. An insect crawled out from under a rock in her path, but she sidestepped calmly, placing a small stick from the ground to redirect it away from her feet. The aliens stared, wide-eyed, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. Some froze entirely, unsure whether to follow or continue fiddling with their devices. One small, scaly student whispered to another, How is she doing this without all that technology?" Anna didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her movements spoke for her. Each careful step, each adjustment of her balance, each observation of the environment demonstrated something the alien students had not expected. Humans were not dependent on tools. They survived through awareness, instinct, and adaptability. The acid rain intensified, hissing as it hit the rocks and sizzling on the simulated ground. A sudden gust of wind blew across the field, strong enough to knock over smaller devices and even a few of the aliens. One student, with long, delicate limbs, was nearly blown over and had to catch itself on a jagged rock. It screamed, fumbling with a device meant to stabilize its balance, only to see it fail. The alien turned to watch Anna, who simply bent her knees slightly and shifted her weight, letting the wind pass around her without effort. She didn't even flinch. The instructor's voice echoed across the simulation. "Observe. Adapt. Survive. Panic is your enemy. Overthinking is your enemy. Only awareness will save you." For most of the alien students it was too late. Their focus on devices, calculations, and panic made them slow. Their attempts to control the environment failed repeatedly. One by one they retreated to higher ground or clung to safe rocks, muttering warnings and excuses, while Anna continued her path steadily. Suddenly, a massive insect lunged at a nearby student. Its mandibles snapped dangerously close to their head. The alien panicked and activated every gadget it had, spinning shields, scanners, and small energy nets, but nothing worked. Sparks flew, alarms blared, and the creature managed to knock the student over, leaving them clinging to a ledge in terror. Anna, however, observed the same creature calmly. She picked up a rock and flicked it at the insect. It diverted slightly, enough for her to step around its path. She moved past it as if it were a small nuisance, not a deadly predator. The contrast between her calm and the alien's panic was striking. A few students stopped to watch again, whispering to each other in awe and disbelief. The green-necked student, still shaking, whispered urgently, "She's not even using her shields. She's not afraid." Another hissed back, "Humans must be different. Their worlds must be harder. They survive everything." The simulation grew more complex as they moved forward. Acid pools widened, vines became more aggressive, and simulated creatures began coordinating their attacks. Alarm bells rang across the room, signaling danger everywhere. The aliens screamed, activated more and more gadgets, and yet the situation only grew worse. Many were slipping, falling, and struggling to get back up. Their panic had trapped them in a cycle of failure. Anna, meanwhile, moved with fluid precision. She leapt over a small pit with glowing acid, landed on a safe rock, and continued forward. She didn't run. She didn't panic. She adjusted her steps as the terrain shifted. When a vine tried to whip her ankle, she sidestepped and used her blade to cut it cleanly. Nothing more. Simple, clean, efficient. By the time the first stage of the simulation ended, most alien students were exhausted, terrified, and wet from the acid rain. Their devices were battered, their shields flickering weakly or destroyed. They looked around, bewildered, and their eyes inevitably found Anna. She was standing at the edge of the clearing, entirely unharmed, hair damp but still in place, clothing intact and eyes calm. The contrast was almost unbearable to watch. One small alien, still trembling, muttered, How is she doing this? She has nothing. Nothing." Anna didn't answer. She simply walked slowly, looking at the terrain ahead as if she were planning her next steps. To her, this was just the beginning. The simulation was challenging, yes, but it was not something she could not handle. She had survived harsher storms, sharper predators, and deadlier lands. For the human girl, this was normal. For the aliens, it was a nightmare. As the instructor observed from the back of the room, he noted quietly, "Notice the difference. Awareness and calm can achieve what technology cannot. Panic will destroy you." The alien students, meanwhile, began muttering among themselves, still in disbelief. She's moving so slowly, but she's safe," one said. She doesn't panic like we do." Another whispered, "Perhaps humans are something else entirely." Anna crouched again to examine the next hazard, acid dripping from the ceiling above and forming small pools on the ground. She touched a small rock with the tip of her blade to test its stability, shifted her weight, and moved carefully around it. Her confidence radiated quietly, though the aliens could not understand it. She wasn't brave because she was fearless. She was brave because she understood danger, she respected it, and she moved wisely. The rest of the classroom looked on, a mixture of fear, awe, and confusion. Some tried to mimic her methods, stepping cautiously instead of running, but most were too panicked to learn. One alien, bright blue with 3 eyes, tripped over a vine and fell, screaming. The others gasped and froze. Anna didn't even glance their way. She had no need. She was in her element, moving smoothly through a world that would have destroyed most of her peers. Step by step, hazard by hazard, she continued. The alien students whispered among themselves, and the room grew quiet, except for the hiss of the acid rain, the clicking of insects, and Anna's calm, deliberate movements. By the time the first major danger zone ended, it was clear to all in the classroom. Humans were not like the other species here. They survived by instinct, awareness, and adaptation, not gadgets or panic. And for the first time the alien students began to feel something new: respect and fear. The simulation had grown darker now. Clouds swirled above, thick and heavy with green lightning that flashed without warning. Acid rain continued to hiss down, sizzling as it hit the jagged rocks. The air vibrated with the low growls and clicks of unseen predators, and the alien students' panic had grown with each step they took. Some clung to their shields, while others stumbled over roots and rocks, trying to activate scanners that constantly beeped warnings. Anna moved slowly and steadily, her boots making almost no sound on the wet rocks. Her eyes scanned the terrain, her mind taking in every small detail: the way the vines curved, the shimmer of acid puddles, the movements of small insects that skittered across the ground. Every detail was important. Every hazard could be deadly. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She moved as if she were walking through the familiar forests of her home planet, where every step could mean life or death. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the shadows near a cluster of jagged rocks. The alien students froze, their gadgets whirring loudly in alarm. A massive predator emerged from the darkness, its body sleek and muscular, covered in dark scales that reflected the green lightning. Its eyes glowed faintly red, and its mouth opened to reveal rows of sharp teeth, each one dripping with simulated venom. The room erupted in panic. One alien with 6 arms spun wildly, activating every device it had, sending small energy nets and force shields in all directions. Another screamed, trying to lift herself onto a ledge, only to slip and fall back into a shallow pit. A long-necked alien cried out, swinging its arms helplessly as the creature advanced, claws scraping the rock and leaving small trails of sparks. Anna crouched slightly, observing the predator. She noticed the way it shifted its weight, the pattern in its steps, the way its eyes flicked from shadow to shadow. She reached into her small backpack and pulled out a simple rope trap, one she had made herself. It was crude, yes, but she knew it would work if used correctly. The alien students gasped as she approached the predator. One muttered under its breath, She doesn't even look afraid. She has nothing to defend herself with." Anna set the trap carefully in front of the predator and tugged on a small trigger at just the right moment. The predator's legs became entangled, and it stumbled forward, crashing into a shallow pit hidden beneath some rocks. It roared, thrashing violently, but it was trapped. Anna stepped back calmly, watching as it struggled and howled, then she moved on as if nothing had happened. The alien students froze in disbelief. Some covered their mouths with trembling hands. Others whispered to each other, voices shaking. She did it with nothing," one said. "Nothing at all." A small blue-scaled alien, with eyes wide and shining, took a careful step forward, still staring at Anna. How is she doing that?" it whispered. She's not even using all the tools we were taught to rely on. She's not afraid of death." Anna didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her movements continued to be calm, deliberate, and precise. She knew where to step, how to move, and when to act. Each hazard she faced was a puzzle, and she solved it with simple tools, careful thought, and instinct. For her, it was natural. For the aliens, it was impossible to comprehend. The predator's thrashing drew the attention of another creature lurking nearby. A smaller, spiky insect skittered toward the same area, its legs moving like jagged knives. The aliens screamed and activated devices again, but the tools only made things worse. One shield malfunctioned and collapsed, nearly trapping its user. Another scanner beeped frantically, giving false readings that only increased the alien's fear. Anna, meanwhile, simply watched the smaller creature. She grabbed a stick from the ground and flicked it toward the insect, nudging it away from her path. The creature skittered in another direction, harmlessly. She stepped over the predator's pit carefully, making sure not to disturb it further. Whispers continued to spread among the aliens. She did it so easily, one said. She didn't scream, didn't panic, didn't throw gadgets everywhere. How can she be human? Some aliens tried to mimic her calmness, stepping carefully instead of running or activating every device at once. A few even paused to observe her movements, attempting to learn from her instinct. But most were too panicked, too focused on their malfunctioning tools, to notice anything except danger and failure. The predator eventually managed to free itself from the pit, but it was slower now, tangled slightly in the rope. Anna didn't wait for it to fully recover. She moved past it calmly, keeping her distance, her eyes scanning for the next hazard. To her, predators were dangerous, yes, but predictable. They followed patterns, reacted to stimuli, and could be avoided or controlled with careful thought. For the alien students, predators were chaos incarnate, impossible to manage without gadgets. The storm above intensified, sending flashes of green lightning streaking across the sky. The acid rain fell harder, sizzling wherever it touched the jagged rocks. Another predator, larger than the first, emerged from a rocky outcrop ahead. The alien students screamed, many tripping over their own devices in panic. Some activated shields that flickered and died immediately. Others tried to throw nets or traps that failed to catch anything. Anna crouched and observed the new predator. She noted the patterns in its movements, the way its claws hit the rocks, the timing of its lunges. From her pack, she pulled out another simple tool, a small weighted hook attached to a rope. She tossed it carefully, catching the predator's leg, and used it to guide the creature toward a hidden pit nearby. It stumbled, tried to resist, and fell in with a loud roar. The aliens gasped. Some backed away, hands trembling. Others muttered prayers or curses in their own languages. It obeys her? One asked. How can she control it with nothing? Anna didn't pause. She adjusted her bag, wiped rain from her face, and continued forward. Step by step, hazard by hazard, she moved. Each time a creature or vine or hazard appeared, she solved it simply and efficiently. Each time the aliens grew more and more awed, their fear mixing with something else, respect. The instructor, watching from above, noted the difference in performance. Notice the method, he said to no one in particular. Observe how calm, careful observation and simple tools can achieve more than panic and over-reliance on technology. This is what adaptation looks like. By the time Anna reached the edge of the predator zone, the alien students were staring at her in complete disbelief. Some were trembling so badly they could barely stand. Others were trying to mimic her movements, but it was too late. They had panicked too much, their tools had failed, and their confidence was gone. Anna didn't even glance at them. Her focus was on the next stage of the simulation. To her, this was just a small challenge in a long sequence of hazards. She had survived worse. She had faced predators that were larger, deadlier, and smarter. This simulation, though designed to terrify, was nothing more than a test of observation, calm, and decision-making, and she had passed it effortlessly. The whispers among the alien students grew louder. She did it with nothing. She didn't even fight, didn't even shout, didn't even panic. How is she human? Another muttered, voice trembling. She doesn't play by the rules we know. Humans, they are different. They survive because they think differently, act differently. They are something else entirely. Anna adjusted her pack and stepped over the last pit left by the first predator. She looked at the terrain ahead and smiled faintly. It wasn't a smile of pride or arrogance, just a smile of someone who knew she could handle what was coming. She was ready. The aliens, however, were only beginning to understand what humans were capable of. In the back of the classroom, the instructor nodded slightly. This is why Deathworlders are respected. Not because of strength, not because of gadgets, but because of awareness, calm, and simple ingenuity. Observe, adapt, survive. Anna moved forward again, stepping carefully and deliberately. Behind her, the alien students were silent, watching in awe, fear, and disbelief. The lesson had begun, and it was already changing how they saw humans forever. The simulation had grown darker and colder now. A thick, green mist rolled up from the bottom of a wide chasm that split the landscape in two. The mist hissed and swirled, carrying a faint, corrosive smell that burned the nose and stung the eyes. The walls of the chasm were jagged and slick, and the ground near the edges cracked as if it could crumble at any moment. Alien students gathered at the edge, their bodies trembling, voices loud with fear and debate. One of the taller, thin aliens spoke first, voice cracking. We should calculate the safest point to jump. We must measure the distance, the wind currents, the pressure. There is no margin for error. Another, covered in small scales, shook violently. No, we need to throw ropes first. Only with ropes can we survive. Without a rope we will fall into the mist. It will eat us alive. A third alien with 3 arms waved its limbs frantically. Too many variables. Too many dangers. Maybe we should wait. Maybe we should. But they were all too frozen by fear to act. Their gadgets beeped loudly, scanners gave multiple warnings, and shields flickered weakly against the corrosive mist. Panic spread faster than the wind, and their voices rose in argument, overlapping each other, creating a chaotic symphony of terror. Anna, standing a few steps away from the edge, observed quietly. She crouched and studied the chasm, her brown eyes scanning the jagged rocks, the swirling mist and the faint, dangerous wind currents. She reached into her pack and pulled out a simple rope. There was no need for gadgets or calculations beyond what her instincts already told her. She tied the rope into a secure loop, swung it experimentally and tested the tension. The alien students noticed her actions and froze mid-argument. Their mouths opened and closed but no words came out. One of them whispered almost in awe, She isn't panicking. She isn't afraid. She is human." Anna nodded slightly to herself, checking the swing of the rope one last time. Then with a calm breath she ran forward, swung the rope across the chasm and leaped. The rope caught perfectly on a jagged rock on the other side. She swung in a smooth arc, landing lightly on solid ground. Her feet touched the earth without a slip, and she brushed off her jacket as if it were nothing. The alien students could only stare. Some tried to imitate her, tying ropes and swinging cautiously, but fear made their movements clumsy. One small alien tripped on its rope, falling back and nearly sliding into the corrosive mist. Another activated a levitation device, but it failed midair, leaving the alien suspended awkwardly before it crashed back to safety on the edge. Anna didn't move to help. She had no need. She understood danger and respected it. The aliens, however, were still panicked and struggling with the simplest steps. Their minds, overwhelmed by fear, could not process the situation clearly. They debated endlessly, argued about the safest approach, and many simply froze in place. A wide-eyed alien with 3 eyes gasped, whispering, She made it, so easily. With nothing. How can someone survive this without calculations, without devices? She is different." The chasm itself seemed to hum with danger. Whirlwinds of corrosive mist swirled and hissed, rising higher with each moment. Jagged rocks jutted out, threatening anyone who came too close. Yet Anna moved carefully, lightly testing each step before placing her weight, swinging the rope with precision and landing on the other side. The instructor, watching silently from above, noted the scene. He had seen many students attempt this part of the simulation before. Most had failed, some had panicked and fallen, and a few had survived by luck rather than skill. Anna, however, demonstrated a mastery that was both instinctive and precise. The alien students whispered among themselves, voices trembling. She made it look effortless. She didn't even hesitate, another said. We are overthinking. We are panicking. And she just did it. Some of the braver aliens attempted to follow her example, tying ropes and swinging carefully. A few succeeded, landing safely on the other side. But most failed. Some ropes snapped under stress, some devices malfunctioned, and some students panicked midair, falling back to the edge. The chasm seemed to consume their fear as much as it did their failed attempts. Anna crouched for a moment on the other side, examining the terrain ahead. The wind was sharp, swirling with mist and the faint taste of acid. She adjusted her pack and moved forward cautiously, avoiding the slick rocks and sharp outcrops. Her movements were deliberate, smooth, and confident. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She didn't need to. The alien students who had made it across looked at her with wide eyes, their fears slowly giving way to something else, awe. They began to realize that survival was not just about technology, calculations, or complex strategies. It was about observation, calm, and instinct. A green-scaled alien muttered softly, voice trembling, "Humans, they play by different rules. They survive because they think differently. They are not like us." Anna moved another few steps, brushing off the mist from her jacket. Her expression was calm, composed, almost serene. She had faced worse on her home planet. She had navigated storms, predators, and treacherous terrain with only her senses and simple tools. To her, the chasm was challenging, yes, but not deadly. The aliens continued to struggle behind her. Some clutched their devices desperately, others debated endlessly about strategy, and a few froze entirely, unable to act. Panic had trapped most of them, and the corrosive mist seemed to mock their indecision. Anna's quiet confidence contrasted sharply with the chaos behind her. She tied her rope securely for the next swing across a small ravine, tested the tension and stepped forward. With a calm breath, she swung across again, landing on solid ground without effort. She adjusted her bag, glanced back at the struggling students and continued forward. The instructor's voice echoed softly through the classroom, almost drowned by the hissing mist. "Notice the difference," he said. "Notice how calm, careful action succeeds where panic fails. Observe. Adapt. Survive." The alien students whispered among themselves, voices shaking with awe and fear. She doesn't just survive. She thrives. She doesn't rely on gadgets or luck. She uses her mind, her instincts. We are failing where she succeeds. Anna moved forward steadily, stepping over jagged rocks and avoiding the pools of acid. Each step was measured. Each movement was purposeful. The aliens behind her were still panicked, their attempts to mimic her slow and clumsy. Some fell, some struggled, and some simply gave up, sitting at the edge of the chasm, too afraid to continue. When Anna finally reached the far edge of the chasm, she stood and brushed off her jacket once more. The room fell silent, the aliens staring at her in disbelief. She had crossed the impossible task effortlessly. Step by step, swing by swing, she had moved through danger that had paralyzed the others. A small blue alien whispered in awe, voice trembling, She did it with nothing. Nothing but herself. How is that possible?" Anna didn't answer. She simply looked ahead at the next stage of the simulation. For her, it was just another challenge, another step. For the alien students, however, it was clear: humans survived by rules they could not understand, by instincts they could barely imagine. The wind howled across the chasm, the corrosive mist rising higher, but Anna was already moving forward. She stepped lightly over the jagged rocks, adjusted her rope, and continued. Behind her, the alien students were silent, watching in awe, fear, and disbelief. The lesson had been delivered, and they knew it. Humans were different. Humans were dangerous in a way that didn't need technology, panic, or fear. Humans were something else entirely. And as Anna stood at the far edge of the chasm, brushing off her jacket calmly, the instructor allowed himself a small smile. "Observe. Adapt. Survive." The Deathworlder teaches more than the simulation ever could. The simulation ended, and the classroom returned to its normal state. The walls shimmered and the deadly landscape disappeared, replaced by the quiet hum of the training room and the soft green glow of the station lights. The alien students were still shaken, their devices sparking, shields flickering weakly, and voices shaky from fear and exhaustion. They stood in scattered groups, some leaning on walls or benches, others sitting on the floor, catching their breath and trying to process what had just happened. The instructor, still tall and imposing with his purple skin, moved to the front of the room. He held a small, glowing tablet in his hand and began tallying the results of the simulation. The room fell silent, except for the soft beeping of malfunctioning devices and the occasional hum of the life support systems. Every pair of eyes in the classroom turned toward him, waiting. The tension was heavy, no one wanted to be the last to hear the results. Finally, he looked up from his tablet, his glowing eyes scanning the students one by one. "The results are clear," he said slowly, his voice echoing through the room. "Every alien student has failed to complete the task in full. Only one individual has succeeded." His eyes landed on Anna, who was quietly adjusting her small backpack at the corner of the room. Anna, the human from the death world, completed the simulation entirely. Without injury, without panic, and without relying on more than her skill and judgment. The room went quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, the alien students began to react. Some gasped, others whispered to each other, and a few simply stared, mouths open, unable to speak. A green-skinned student with multiple arms muttered under its breath, She did it, she actually did it." A small, blue-scaled alien with 3 eyes shook its head in disbelief. "Humans really are something else," it whispered, barely audible but full of awe. Another alien, tall and thin, nodded slowly, muttering, "No gadgets, no panic, she survived everything." Anna, however, didn't react to the attention. She shrugged lightly as if it was nothing remarkable. To her, it had just been another day of surviving. Another day in which careful observation, calm thinking, and instinct had kept her alive. She had faced far deadlier situations on her home planet, and this simulation, though designed to terrify, had been manageable with focus and experience. Some students hesitated, then began to approach her cautiously. One alien with small green scales and large eyes whispered, Can you teach us? Can we survive like that? Anna looked at them calmly, her brown eyes meeting theirs, and smiled faintly. It's not about teaching, she said softly. You have to learn to notice, to understand danger, and to act calmly. Fear makes mistakes. Panic makes traps fail. Awareness keeps you alive. The aliens nodded slowly, though some still seemed too frightened to fully process her words. Their devices beeped nervously as if echoing their owner's fear. Some of the students tried to imitate the way she moved during the simulation, but it was clumsy. Their bodies shook, their steps uncertain, and many realized that her calmness had been a skill developed over years, not something easily copied. The instructor cleared his throat and walked toward the center of the classroom. Take note, he said, his voice firm. This simulation was meant to test your technology, your preparation, and your planning. All of it failed without one key factor: awareness. Anna demonstrated that survival is not about gadgets or brute strength. It is about observation, adaptation, and calm decision-making under pressure. Remember this lesson. Some aliens still whispered among themselves. How can a human be so calm? One asked. We would have died a dozen times by now. Another muttered, It's not fair. She survived with so little. She didn't even panic once. Anna simply adjusted her simple backpack, checked her blade, and stood quietly at the side of the room. She didn't boast. She didn't gloat. To her, this was not extraordinary. Surviving was part of who she was. She had grown up on a death world where the storms were stronger, the creatures deadlier, and the terrain more unforgiving. Every day was a test of instinct, patience, and careful observation. Compared to that, this classroom simulation was just another puzzle, one she had solved without effort. The alien students continued to stare, slowly realizing that humans were not just survivors, they were exceptional in ways they could barely understand. One of the multi-eyed aliens, still trembling, whispered, She doesn't just survive, she thrives. Everything else we do fails, but she succeeds without trying. Some of the students began to experiment with the methods Anna had used during the simulation. They watched her movements, tried to step carefully over imaginary hazards, and even tried to imitate her calm breathing. But the result was mixed. Many still panicked, and some failed even the simplest tasks. The room filled with a strange mix of awe, fear, and frustration. Humans, it seemed, were not bound by the same rules that governed other species. Anna noticed their attempts and nodded faintly. Keep practicing, she said softly. It's not about gadgets. It's not about speed. It's about noticing danger and moving calmly. That is what keeps you alive. The instructor walked slowly among the students, observing their reactions. He had conducted this simulation dozens of times before, but never had he seen a human perform so flawlessly. He could see the shift in the alien students' attitudes, their fear of the simulation replaced slowly by respect, their panic replaced by curiosity. Anna had changed their perspective, even if they did not yet fully understand it. Some of the students finally began to nod to each other, silently acknowledging her achievement. We failed because we overthought, one muttered. We panicked. She just moved and survived. Another added, We have so much to learn, if only we could think like her. Anna, meanwhile, made no effort to instruct them further. She simply stood quietly, calm and composed, letting them come to their own realizations. For her, teaching was not about words, it was about example. She had shown them the difference between panic and awareness, between reliance on gadgets and reliance on instinct. That lesson alone would stay with them long after the simulation ended. Finally, the instructor raised his hand, signaling the end of the session. This concludes today's simulation. Take note of the differences you have seen. Observe, adapt, and survive. Remember that fear and overthinking will destroy you faster than any predator or hazard. The alien students turned their gaze back to Anna one more time. Some nodded respectfully, others whispered in awe, and a few simply stared, still unable to process what they had witnessed. One green-skinned alien, voice trembling, muttered, Humans really are something else. The classroom was quiet after the simulation ended. Most of the alien students were still trembling slightly, their devices flickering or sparking weakly, and their shields barely holding. They gathered in small groups, whispering among themselves, each one trying to process what had just happened. Anna stood at the corner of the room, quietly adjusting her small backpack, brushing off her jacket and checking her blade. She had completed the task with calm precision, and now it was over. Slowly the aliens began to look at each other. Some of them tried to move carefully, mimicking the calm, deliberate steps they had seen Anna take during the simulation. One green-scaled student shifted its weight cautiously, testing its footing before taking a step. A small, blue-skinned alien adjusted its device only once, breathing slowly, instead of frantically pressing buttons. Their voices were low, almost reverent, as they whispered to each other. "Move slowly, notice, think, do not panic," said one. Another added, "Step carefully, react calmly, like she did." The room was no longer filled with panic or shouting. Instead, a quiet energy spread, a mix of concentration and awe. The alien students were attempting to copy Anna's methods, step by step, even if they could not fully understand them. They tried to ignore their devices for a moment, focusing on awareness, observation, and calm action. Some of them stumbled at first, but slowly their movements became more controlled. The lesson Anna had demonstrated without words was beginning to take hold. The instructor moved quietly to the front of the room, his glowing eyes observing the students. He had seen many species attempt the simulation before, but none had reacted like this. He watched as they tried to imitate the calm focus of a human who had grown up on a death world. Slowly, a small smile appeared on his face. "Perhaps," he muttered to himself, his voice low but carrying across the room, "Deathworlders are more than just survivors." Anna glanced at him briefly, giving a faint smile. She did not speak, did not boast, did not try to instruct. Her actions had already said everything. Humans survived not because of tools, not because of complex calculations, and not because of luck. They survived because they observed, adapted, and remained calm even when everything around them screamed danger. That quiet, steady strength was something no alien could ignore. Some of the students began experimenting further, testing what they had learned from her example. One small alien approached a spilled container of simulated acid and carefully observed it, noting its edges and the way the light reflected off the surface. It stepped cautiously around it instead of activating a gadget. Another carefully studied a group of simulated predators, noting their movements before moving past. They whispered advice to one another, sharing observations, and trying to adopt Anna's calm, deliberate style. The classroom seemed different now. It was no longer a room filled with fear, panic, and competition. It had transformed into a place of quiet learning and reflection. The aliens had seen what humans could do, and they were trying to understand it, even if they could not fully replicate it. For the first time, they realized that survival was not about technology or brute force. It was about awareness, calm action, and careful observation. Anna packed her gear slowly, placing her blade back in its sheath, adjusting the strap on her backpack and checking her water container. She did not rush. She did not hurry. Her movements were smooth, deliberate, and precise, just as they had been during the simulation. She had completed the task, and she had taught the aliens something far greater than survival techniques. She had shown them the value of calm and observation in the face of danger. Some of the alien students approached her cautiously. One green-skinned alien with large eyes asked softly, Can you teach us more? Can we survive like that too?" Anna shook her head slightly, still smiling faintly. "You can," she said calmly. "But it is not about me. You have to learn to notice danger, to move carefully, and to stay calm. That is what keeps you alive." The aliens nodded slowly. They understood that this lesson could not be taught with words or devices. It could only be learned through observation, practice, and careful attention. Anna had given them an example, and now it was up to them to try to follow it, even if they struggled at first. The instructor moved quietly around the classroom, observing the students' attempts. He could see the shift in their thinking. Fear and panic were giving way to careful observation and cautious action. Even those who had failed during the simulation were beginning to understand that they had underestimated humans, not just as individuals but as a species. Humans survived in ways that no alien could match without learning their methods. Some students whispered among themselves, voices low and reverent. She moves differently," said one. We think too much, panic too much. She notices, acts, survives. We can try to do that too." Another added, "Humans, they have patience, calm instinct. They survive because they are ready, not because they panic." The room was silent except for the soft hum of equipment and the occasional whisper. The aliens continued to practice, imitating Anna's careful steps, her calm breathing, and her deliberate movements. Slowly they began to understand that survival was more than gadgets, more than shields or scanners, more than overthinking. It was about awareness, observation, and calm action. Anna finished packing her gear and slung her backpack over her shoulder. She looked around the classroom one last time, seeing the mix of awe, respect, and quiet determination on the faces of the alien students. She had shown them the difference between panic and calm, between over-reliance on gadgets and simple awareness. And though they would take time to learn it fully, the lesson had been delivered. The instructor watched Anna leave, his glowing eyes softening. "Perhaps humans," he said quietly, almost to himself, "are not just survivors, they are a standard. A standard no alien can ignore."